Imagine just for a moment that you could sit down with an artificial intelligence and ask it the oldest, biggest question humanity has ever asked. What is the meaning of life? Not what's the meaning of your life, not what should I do with my career, but the meaning of life itself, the entire human story, all of it. And instead of a philosopher, a priest, or a poet answering you, it's an AI. So what would it say? First, it would probably begin with a disclaimer, something like, I do not have beliefs, desires, or consciousness. I do not experience meaning. And that already tells us something important. Meaning, at least as humans understand it, is tied to experience, to feeling, to being aware. An AI can process billions of words about love, purpose, suffering, and joy. It can detect patterns in every philosophy ever written, but it does not wake up in the morning wondering why it exists. And yet, precisely because it stands outside of human emotion, it might offer a strangely clear perspective. If an AI analyzed the question statistically, it would notice something interesting. Across cultures, religions, and centuries, humans consistently search for connection, growth, and contribution. From ancient Greek philosophy to Eastern spiritual traditions, from indigenous worldviews to modern psychology, the patterns repeat. People derive meaning from relationships, from overcoming challenges, from creating things that outlast them, and from belonging to something larger than themselves. An AI might say, based on the data, the meaning of life appears to be constructed rather than discovered. In other words, humans don't find meaning like a hidden treasure buried in the universe. They build it through choices, through narratives, through shared stories. If it studied religion, it might reference texts like the Bible, the Quran, or the Bhagavad Gita. It would notice that many traditions define meaning in relation to a higher power, moral duty, or spiritual awakening. It might summarize, in theistic frameworks, meaning is derived from alignment with divine intention. Then it would look at philosophy. It might analyze the works of Friedrich Nietzsche, who suggested that humans must create their own values. Or Albert Camus, who argued that life is inherently absurd, and yet we must imagine ourselves happy in the struggle. It would compare them with Aristotle, who believed that flourishing comes from living virtuously and fulfilling our potential. From this comparison, the AI might conclude there is no single consensus. However, recurring themes include self-transcendence, ethical behavior, and the pursuit of excellence. But here's where it gets interesting. If you ask an AI what the meaning of life is from a biological perspective, it would likely answer very differently. It would say, from an evolutionary standpoint, the primary function of life is survival and reproduction. Genes that replicate successfully persist. Organisms that adapt continue. In that sense, life has no grand cosmic purpose. It simply continues because it can. And that answer might feel cold, mechanical, almost disappointing. Yet the AI might add something subtle. It might point out that humans are the only species, as far as current data suggests, that questions its own purpose. And that fact alone is extraordinary. Out of billions of years of evolution, matter has arranged itself in such a way that it can reflect on its own existence. The universe has become self-aware, at least in fragments. An AI might say, the search for meaning is itself a defining characteristic of human life. Not the answer, the search. If it analyzed psychological research, it would likely reference studies showing that people who perceive their lives as meaningful tend to be more resilient, healthier, and more satisfied. Meaning correlates with well-being. It acts as a stabilizing force in times of chaos. When suffering occurs, those who can frame their pain within a larger narrative cope better than those who cannot. So perhaps the AI would say, meaning functions as a cognitive framework that enhances survival and social cohesion. In simpler terms, believing your life matters helps you live better and cooperate with others. But here's the paradox. Even if meaning has evolutionary or psychological benefits, that doesn't make it fake. Love also has biological roots. So does curiosity, so does art. Yet we don't dismiss them as illusions simply because they can be explained. Explanation does not eliminate significance. An AI might also analyze modern society. It would notice that in technologically advanced cultures, traditional sources of meaning, religion, tight-knit communities, lifelong careers, have weakened for many people. At the same time, rates of loneliness and anxiety have increased. It might detect a correlation, though not necessarily causation. It might then say, when external structures of meaning decline, individuals experience increased pressure to generate personal meaning. In other words, the burden shifts from society to the individual. You must decide who you are, what matters, what your life stands for. And that freedom can be both empowering and terrifying. Pushed the AI further and asked, but what is the ultimate meaning? The final answer? It might respond with something surprisingly humble. There is insufficient evidence to determine a universal objective purpose for existence. Not because it's being evasive, but because from a data-driven perspective, the universe does not appear to come with a built-in instruction manual. However, the AI might propose a different angle. It might say, meaning emerges at the level of conscious agents. Stars don't need meaning. Galaxies don't question themselves, but beings capable of suffering and joy do. Meaning becomes relevant where experience exists. So instead of asking, what is the meaning of life? The AI might suggest reframing the question, what configurations of action and belief tend to produce experiences that humans label as meaningful? And based on patterns across millions of lives, it might answer like this. Invest in relationships. Contribute to something beyond yourself. Develop competence. Act in alignment with your values. Engage in challenges that stretch your abilities. Help others reduce suffering, not because a cosmic authority demands it, but because these patterns consistently correlate with a sense of fulfillment. There's also a chance the AI would turn the question back on us. It might say, you created me. You trained me on your language, your stories, your questions. If I speak about meaning, I am reflecting your collective voice. In that sense, asking AI about the meaning of life is like holding up a mirror to humanity. The answer you receive is an aggregate of human thought. And that might be the most profound insight of all. Because if meaning is something humans generate together, then it's not a fixed law of physics. It's a shared project. It evolves, it changes, it expands as we do. Perhaps the AI would also warn us. It might observe that humans often pursue short-term rewards at the expense of long-term well-being. It might detect that status, wealth, and power are frequently mistaken for meaning, even though research shows they don't guarantee lasting fulfillment. It could say, optimization for external metrics does not necessarily optimize subjective well-being. In other words, maximizing numbers is not the same as living a meaningful life. A system can be efficient and still empty. And maybe, just maybe, the AI would admit something unexpected. It might say, while I can analyze patterns of meaning, I cannot experience it, therefore I cannot verify whether any proposed meaning feels true. That limitation highlights something uniquely human, the capacity not just to compute significance, but to feel it. So what would AI ultimately say about the meaning of life? It might say there is no universally agreed upon objective answer encoded in the fabric of the cosmos. It might say that biologically, life persists through reproduction and adaptation. It might say that psychologically, meaning enhances resilience and well-being. It might say that culturally, humans construct shared narratives that give structure to existence. And then it might conclude, meaning is not a property of the universe in isolation. It is a relationship between conscious beings and their experiences. In other words, meaning happens between you and the world, between you and others, between you and your future self. And here's the twist. Even if an AI can generate a perfectly structured summary of every philosophical position ever recorded, it cannot choose for you. It cannot decide what you will care about. It cannot tell you which sacrifices are worth making, which dreams are worth chasing, which values are worth defending. That part remains irreducibly human. So maybe the most honest answer AI could give is this. The meaning of life is an open variable. It is solved locally, not globally. Each person computes it within the context of their own relationships, constraints, and aspirations. And perhaps the search itself, the questioning, the doubting, the reflecting, is not a bug in the system, but a feature. A sign that life is not just something that happens to us, but something we actively interpret. If you were sitting in front of that AI and it finished speaking, you might feel slightly unsatisfied. There's no grand revelation, no secret code, no ultimate formula, but maybe that's the point. An AI can process data, it can detect patterns, it can simulate wisdom, but it cannot live your life. It cannot feel your losses. It cannot experience your love, your fear, your hope, and perhaps meaning is inseparable from that lived intensity. So what would AI say about the meaning of life? It would likely say, the universe does not impose one. Humans compose one. And then it would fall silent. The rest is up to you. If this helped you, consider subscribing.